Good evening, everybody. Why don't we get started? Thanks for joining us on this snowy evening. When I looked at the calendar and thought that we're going to be doing a junior program in mid-January, I thought to myself, there's nothing that could possibly go wrong. And of course, weather has cooperated or not cooperated this evening. For those of you I haven't met yet, my name is John Young. I'm the chair of the counseling department here. It's a pleasure to have you with us. I'm with my colleague Jeff Griffa. Actually, why don't I have Jeff introduce himself and then we can get things started.
Hi everyone, I'm Jeff Griffa. I'm one of the college counselors. This is my 21st year at McQuaid. Happy to be here to hopefully guide you all in the right direction tonight.
And this is not my 21st year at McQuaid. This is the almost completed year one at McQuaid. But prior to this, I've worked for over 30 years on the college admissions side of things. So between Mr. Griffin and myself, I think we've got a good range of experience to bring to your sons as they enter this process. What's the purpose of tonight's program? We want to kick off the college search process for your sons this evening. And I'll talk a little bit about how we're going to work with them over the next few months to move this all along. But to me, now's where things begin. It's January. A lot of families are going to start visiting colleges if they have not already over the February break. And so we think this is a perfect time to get things moving. For those of you who haven't been with one of these programs before, I do want to spend a little time talking about the counseling office and how we're organized. We're really blessed to be situated in the way that we are, that we have 4 school counselors, Jim Traver, who works with our middle school students, and then Scott Allen, Margaret Gordon, and Sarah Snyder, who work with all of our high school students. And they're going to continue to work with your sons over their senior year in the way that they traditionally have. But Mr. Griffin and I will now add a new layer on as we start working with the juniors. Our first meeting with them will be in February as we plan their senior year courses. And we've left ourselves enough time in those meetings to not only plan for their courses, but to get to know them a little bit better, to start talking about college and the process and how things work. So we're really lucky to have the office situated the way that we do. In addition, we also have Amy Shepard, who's our registrar and the office manager. She'll work with your sons over the year, especially when it comes to scheduling appointments and getting to know us. And then Anne-Marie Galletto, who runs the College Advisement Center, in particular this fall, when over 100 colleges will come to visit McQuaid. That's where your sons will interact with her first, scheduling those appointments, making sure that they are aware of when those colleges they're interested in are coming to campus and getting passes to come from class to go visit with those colleges. And then she'll work with them closely through the application process to make sure all the materials are sent. So she's an important person to know. Let's talk a little bit about the timeline here, though. And this is where this booklet, I think, will be something you want to keep as a ready reference over the next few months. And if you turn to pages 3 first, to really talk about the timeline and what families should be doing. If you look back to November and December, that's when your sons took the PSAT, they got their results, and that's really the first kickoff to this college search process. But now's the time where families start putting together preliminary lists. And it's just beginning, and Mr. Griffin will talk a little bit about how you create those lists. Next week are midterm exams, and we can talk about all the different things that your sons can do to enhance the likelihood of getting admitted to the school of their choice. But the single most important thing is for them to perform in class, and midterms are a big part of that. For some families, taking an SAT or an ACT preparation course is a good thing. It'll help their sons move along in the process. Other people will take advantage of the free resources that the College Board and Khan Academy provide. For those of you who don't know, I know most people are used to hearing names like Princeton Review and Kaplan when it comes to SAT prep courses. When the SAT was reorganized about 3 years ago, they partnered with Khan Academy to create a free SAT prep course that's done online through Khan Academy. So that's accessible to any family at any time. You don't have to pay anything for it. And I think they do a terrific job preparing students for the SAT. This is where you need to know your son as well as you possibly can and know what's going to suit them well. Sometimes they benefit from having a more regularized program that's going to be hold their feet to the fire and getting certain assignments done. You can certainly investigate any of those other programs, but it's worth considering how people are going to prepare for the SAT and the ACT. I'll talk more about standardized testing in a little while. For families who are interested in financial aid, and I imagine that would be most of you, there's a lot of different ways to find out what this is going to cost you before you even go down the road of applying. And every college has to have something called a net price calculator on their website, which will allow you to plug in some basic family financial information and get that information back from the colleges that says if your son were admitted, here's likely what their financial aid package would look like. And you can do that anytime. You can do that now if you feel like it. There's also some other sites that can aggregate that for you. College Board has one. There's a site called My Intuition, MYINTUITION, that actually partners with a lot of different colleges where you can compare colleges side to side to side once you put in your information. So there's some great resources out there to help you figure out some financial circumstances early on. Come February, I think it's time for people to think about a spring administration of the SAT. I'll talk about standardized testing, as I said, in a little bit. And that's when they'll start meeting with us to go over their senior course schedules. A lot of families plan for some college visits over February break. Colleges are prepared for students and families to start visiting in the spring of their junior year. And February break is a popular time for families to do that. But I think the last bullet under February that is really important is to keep focus on your schoolwork and extracurricular activity, because I mentioned that is really the most important thing to be doing at this point. Coming March, that's when we'll begin our college planning seminars, and we'll talk about those a little bit further, but we'll be meeting with your sons in groups over the spring semester to get them up to speed. We'll hand them a packet, much like the one you're receiving this evening, to help them guide them through this process. That's when you start reaching out to colleges and start getting on their mailing lists. The National College Fair is in March. We'll be taking a bus for students to go to that college fair. It'll be actually this year it's on St. Patrick's Day, the 17th, and the day after. Sunday the 17th, families are welcome to go. We'll take a bus over on Monday the 18th for students to actually get there themselves, but if you want to go take advantage of that, it's at the convention center, and there'll be over 150 colleges that are there to meet with families. It's a great opportunity. Come April, if you haven't registered for an SAT or ACT, now is the time to do that. I'll point it out when we talk about them more, but there's the chart with all the dates and deadlines in this booklet. I think sometimes this is where students start to ramp up or pare down their college lists. They start taking ones off that they visited and they didn't like. They start adding ones that their friends say are great, and so they want to put that on the list, and that's okay. It's time to start thinking also, though, in April about how students are going to spend their summer. And we get lots of questions about what the best way to spend your summer is. Is it through doing an academic program? Is it doing research? I think the answer to the question is do something. And that can be as simple as getting a summer job. For families, you might be shocked to know this, but last year's data showed that only 16% of high school seniors reported having a job when they applied to colleges, 1/6. I thought when somebody said that they meant 60%. No, they meant 16%. So families are all the time thinking about how do I stand out in the process? Well, now it's as simple as getting a job. That will help you stand out in the process. But think about how people want to spend their summer. April vacation is another time where families will visit campuses. And then it's time to set some individual meetings up with us to really talk about things on a personal basis. Come May, final exams, prepare for those. There's an SAT and ACT available in May, and then keep in touch. And you can follow along with the rest of the brochure as you go through schedules. I do want to talk a little bit about that college planning seminar that I mentioned, where we're going to be working with your sons over the spring. And we have really a 4-part program that we're going to talk with them about. We're going to spend time talking about the admissions timeline and how decisions are made. Then we're going to have a conversation on standardized testing, the online college search, and college visits. Third, we're going to overview the common application and decision plans and put together an activity resume. And then last, we're going to talk about the college admissions essay and financial aid. I think it's a terrific program where we've done it over the years. I got my first taste of it last year. But what's really going to be neat about this year's program, last year we did it all at once. We threw all this information at them in one sitting, and this year we're going to be able to spread that out and take it in smaller chunks that I think will be easier for your son to digest. And as I mentioned, they're going to get a booklet much like the one you're receiving tonight in that program that will help serve as a resource for them throughout this process. As I mentioned, what comes next is course selection. And in February, that's when we'll meet one-on-one with your sons to talk about their senior level courses. And I think it's a time for you as a family to have good conversations and talk about this, because what we really are thinking about is two things. How complete is their program? And when colleges are looking at a high school transcript, they're going to be concerned about those 5 core academic subjects. How many years of English, how many years of social studies, how many years of math, how many years of science, how many years of foreign language has your son taken? So we want to make sure that they're maximizing those opportunities. At the same time, they're going to want to see how much rigor is in their program. Are they taking advantage of advanced or AP courses when they're available, courses for college credit? And I think the most important question for families is to balance out the appropriate amount of rigor with maintaining sanity and allowing people to be seniors in high school and do all the things that you need to do and enjoy as a senior, not to mention extracurricular activities and taking on other leadership roles. It's the hardest thing to get right, but when you do, it ends up producing a great transcript that has some great challenge and students performing well. When adding that extra AP course then starts tipping grades down in other areas, then you're adding too many things. And that's where we're going to have lots of conversations with your son during that college planning, during that scheduling session. But also we're going to get feedback from faculty. They're going to let us know what courses they're recommending your son for. We're going to look at their transcript and look at their grades this year, their most recent report cards, as we plan all this together. So you're going to get your son will leave that session with a list of here are the courses that they've been recommended for that year, and we're going to pay attention to that closely throughout the spring as their grades progress to make sure that that's an appropriate alignment for their courses. Yes?
Can I ask a quick question on that?
Please.
Is junior year the more important year, though? I mean, do they look at what they're doing in senior year? Or?
Yes, they are going to look at what they're doing in
They
senior
look at
year.
it.
We're in the process right now, as the semester winds down, most colleges are going to request their mid-year grades for senior year. And so we're actually preparing now to get those all set off once the semester is
And
concluded.
that's during the application, like as they're making decisions?
That's correct. So at least in my experience, when I worked on the college admissions side, we used to bookend the review process. The first thing we would start with was the student's high school transcript through the junior year. Then we would look at recommendations, co-curricular activities, the essay, all the other elements of the application, and finish with their senior year grades. So as much as people say junior year is the most important year in the process, I think that's true until your senior year, and then that becomes the most important year in the process. I hope people see that as an opportunity rather than something that's daunting. But think about it. It's usually the year where students are taking their most challenging courses. They've got the most on their plate co-curricularly, leadership roles that they take on. If they can manage to keep all those plates spinning and balanced in their senior year, that says a lot to colleges about their ability to be successful and handle that transition from high school to college. So junior year is important, but I think senior year takes on, if not, even more importance. We have Mr. Serafin here. I'm glad you're here.
Thanks for having me.
Any words of wisdom before I start to talk about the role that the pandemic had?
None.
You've only done this for 40 years. It's no big deal.
Excuse me, can I ask a question?
Please.
This might seem odd, given that the theme is college night. Is there any counseling with the boys around consideration of trade schools in comparison to college? And your comment about pandemic might pair well with my next question of readiness to go into college, given maturity and potential impact of the pandemic of these boys, like that they lost a year.
Sure.
So I'm curious your point of view on
That's
that.
a great question. We're working with several students this year who are going exactly down that route. And I think there's no one path for any of our students. There's multiple paths. And sometimes that's about exploring trade schools. Alfred State has become a popular option for a lot of students because they can go off and learn a trade. It's a 2-year or a 4-year program. They can go off to go to work. Other times we have students who want to just intern and see let me shadow someone for a day and see if this is really what I want and how to proceed. Maybe it's a community college route, maybe it's going directly into the workforce. So we'll have conversations with everybody, seeing where they are and what their plans are and how that might work. But certainly the pandemic has opened up, I think, a wider range of options for students and where they might go than just that traditional four-year school route.
Okay, so you'll help them with
Absolutely.
that conversation?
You bet. And we'll help them with the planning of that if that's the route that they choose to go. Yes?
Do you also talk with them about possibility of gap year programs?
Sure. They've become very popular, I think. And to me, that opportunity for students to take advantage of some of these absolutely amazing programs, to travel for a year, to do some service projects for a year. Some students benefit from a year in a postgraduate program, off at a boarding school as a way to make that transition from high school to college even smoother. So we'll talk down all those paths for students. I think that's a really important consideration. Having worked on the college side of things, we found students who took a gap year actually performed at a higher level right from the start. And maybe it's just a year of maturity, maybe it's they have a better sense of what they want and direction. But there's a lot of students who really benefit from that gap year. Which is a perfect segue to this conversation about the pandemic. We saw more students go that route given the pandemic. I think what we saw on the college side is obviously the proliferation of test optional. That was not necessarily there were certainly about 600 colleges who were test optional prior to the pandemic, but post-pandemic, most colleges have become test optional. That's a big change in how colleges review applications and the information that they have available to them. In addition, there have certainly been some changes in how they behaved admissions-wise. I think initially when the pandemic hit, most colleges were taking a hit on their enrollment, and consequently acceptance rates bounced up a little bit over that time. We've seen them start to go a little bit more back to normal now that the pandemic has eased. But what hasn't changed is the role that financial aid has played. It started to take on a new role during the pandemic and has continued to play that role. I think families now have a much better position to negotiate with colleges. There's a lot more room in how financial aid is doled out. The opportunities for merit and non-need-based financial aid is much greater than it was pre-pandemic. So there's some things we've seen that have stayed the same. There's some things that we saw that changed initially and now have started to level off a little bit since the pandemic has eased a little bit.
Can I just comment on the test optional thing?
Please.
And my daughter is a freshman this year in college, and looking online, we were so afraid of these SAT scores, and I think going test optional allowed these schools to push their scores higher because the only ones that were submitting them were people that were getting extraordinary scores, which isn't really like on the bell curve, it's kind of on the tail.
Sure.
So for those of you that haven't done this before, I wouldn't focus on that number, because I think it's bogus.
It scares a lot.
You mean the number that's on like the
Yeah,
range
like
of
she
what they
goes to
expect?
Villanova, and
Okay.
like, she's like, oh my God, my test score isn't close to that. But they've been able, think about it, if you're test optional, you're only submitting it if you have really, really great SATs, so then they can say, oh, our average SAT score is 1,500. Well, that's because 3/4 of the people here didn't even submit them.
Sure.
So it's I wouldn't be afraid of it, is all.
No, I think what's important if you want to pay attention to scores, and I'll talk a little bit about standardized testing in a bit, is most schools produce what's called a mid 50% range. Middle 50% of the student body score between 1250 and 1390 on the SAT. What that's telling you is the middle half of the class scored between those two numbers. A quarter of the students scored below 1250, a quarter of the students scored above 1390. When schools went test optional, all that happened was that mid 50% band just jumped up.
Correct.
Most schools found it very easy to go test optional because they were admitting students below their mid 50% band all the time anyway. They're used to it. A quarter of their student body did it. So it really wasn't that hard for them to say, we'll go test optional. All it did was raise, because people, to your point, if they had good scores, they submitted them, the numbers jumped up. The people who were getting admitted didn't change very much. There's not that big shift in who colleges were admitting because of that. But it does scare some students. I think all it did, it was raise student scores and in fact raise anxiety levels,
Yeah.
when in fact it was designed to try to relax that a little bit.
I agree. I look at the scores and I'm like, oh my God.
Yeah. It
If you do the math, America's a bunch of geniuses. It doesn't, like, exactly.
It's one of the things I would caution everybody in this room. I think whenever there's a news story about college admissions, the first place they go to ask for a quote is Harvard. They have a very different admissions profile than the vast majority of the world, and they behave very differently. So sometimes people take Harvard's word as the way everybody's going to be handling this, and in fact, they're a pretty rarefied air. So make sure you take a beat back when you hear all these stories and who you're listening to. It's a very, very small group of colleges that they tend to go to for information, when in fact, there's over 4,000 colleges across the United States for you to choose from. By virtue of graduating from a place like McQuaid, your sons will be admitted to 85% of them without question. It's the 15% that's not automatic that we all are worried about here, so that's why we have to do sessions like this, otherwise we wouldn't have to talk about this at all. But it's really worth keeping in mind that the diploma that they get from this institution is going to open a ton of doors to them, and they're going to be set up to be pretty successful in this process. All right, I want to turn things over to Jeff to talk a little bit about the college search and application process from here, and then I'll come back up in a bit.
Thank you, John. So I do like talking about the college search process, much to my student chagrin. I think it's exciting. One of the key things to know that I talk to students about is always brings me back to the Matrix movie from the late 90s when the main character Neo walks in to talk to a character called the Oracle, and above the door where he walks through there's a sign that I think it's in Latin that says "Know thyself." I think that's really key for students throughout this process. And I'm not saying that students need to know themselves to their core. We're all works in progress. But they should really get an understanding of what's important to them academically, personally, socially, and maybe even spiritually as well. So that they can get a sense of their needs and wants and how they can match up to what the colleges are offering. It takes a lot of work. And I think the students that do put in a lot of that time and energy find this experience exciting and even rewarding. But it does mean that the students have to sit back and reflect and think about those things that I mentioned earlier, their values, what they want, and what they need from the college experience. And to your point earlier, we do talk to students about other paths from McQuaid. I have a number of students who are talking about trades, some military, some want to go into EMT, fire safety training. There's just a gamut of opportunities that these students can look into. So I've seen an uptick in those alternate paths in probably the last 3 or 4 years. And perhaps the pandemic did have something to do with it, as we were talking about earlier. So with the college search, you heard that there's almost 5,000 colleges out there to choose from. Which is overwhelming. Just to hear that number, how do you find the perfect fit? And I'll say that there is no such thing as the perfect fit college. There's probably hundreds of colleges out there that are going to be a perfect fit, if you even want to call it that. But we're looking for a good match, a good fit, and those categories that I mentioned earlier, the academics, the social piece, the personal piece. But to help it make it more manageable to search, I like to break it down into 3 tiers, tiers 1, 2, and 3. Tier 1, I had hoped to show you guys some examples of Naviance and College Board's Big Future, as well as the Affordability and Transparency Center. All of those websites that I just referenced are discussed, or were discussed during our College Information Week, which took place in early December. So if you go and look for the McQuaid Jesuit YouTube channel, the Counseling Office YouTube channel, or if you go to the McQuaid website and go to the Counseling Office and search for Parent Night programs, you'll see links to all of this year's, last year's, and I think the previous year's College Information Week programs. And for the past 2 years, I've done a session on Naviance. This year's is really long, so if you're going to watch it, make sure you break it down into segments. I also did a section on being an informed consumer or an educated consumer, which I'll talk a little bit about tonight as well. But for an in-depth look into those 2 concepts, please go to take a look at our College Information Week. In addition to those 2 sessions, there's a number of other valuable sessions that are going to go into depth on these topics that we're kind of introducing tonight. So please go there and take a look as well. So tier 1 research using Naviance, Big Future, using the College Cost Affordability and Transparency Center. That's going to be like, getting brochures in the mail. Okay, so like, I don't know, you guys probably got all these brochures in the mail during the process. You might be getting them now, where you take a look at it. It's got all like the highlighted numbers and things like that, all the nice statistics and photos. So anything that looks good that you want to look at more deeply, you put it in one pile. Anything that you're not interested in, put it in the recycle bin. So that tier 1 research using these websites that I talked about, you can get a profile on these colleges that will give you statistics on admissions, academics, majors, anything that you want to know about it. Some of them, like the Affordability and Transparency Center, that's going to give you probably more data than you know what to do with. But if you want to be an educated consumer, you have to look behind those numbers. Similar to the conversation that we had about the SATs and ACTs, like some people look at this like, well, what does this mean? Well, if you look behind it, you can see that what a retention rate number actually means and what might affect those numbers, and I'll talk about that a little bit later, okay? So using those websites that I mentioned before, students can get kind of like an idea, like looking through the brochure if they want to look more deeply at these colleges. And the next step to look more deeply is I like to call tier 2. And again, I was hoping to show you an example of a college website. And so tier 2 research, what I always advise students to do is look at the 3 A's on a college website. Those are academics, admissions, and aid, financial aid. Okay, I like to think it's pretty easy, but you'd be surprised how many times students get stumped. I introduced that concept in February and talk about it again in April, and they don't remember, which is fine. They've got a lot going on in their lives. And so anyway, the reason we want students to look at the academics piece is because you can see all the majors that are offered at a college. You can look at specialized majors, accelerated programs, dual degree programs. You can take a look at a chemical engineering major at RIT and see the classes that you have to take, along with course descriptions for every single year that you would be there. Okay? That's really valuable, I think, especially when I'm talking to students about course selections. And if they have an idea that they want to go into a particular major, we'll have time to look at a college's website and take a look at the course listing and see how their selections are matching up or not to that intended major. I don't want the tail to wag the dog, so to speak, because we really want the students' interest and enthusiasm over a subject to be the main factor or driving force for them to take a course. But we also want them to be mindful of being prepared for a particular major. Okay? Then you have the admissions portion of a college website. The admissions is exactly what you think it is. It's going to give you dates, deadlines, requirements to successfully submit your application to that college. Okay? And along with any specialized instructions for students who might be going into like a fine arts or something that requires an audition or some other kind of portfolio to be submitted. And then you get to the financial aid piece, and we talked about that a little bit earlier. The financial aid portion of the website, you not only get to see the total cost of attendance of a college, but you can see what scholarships and grants are available for incoming students. And they'll often link you up to outside scholarship search engines for you to use as well. And you can also link into the net price calculator for that particular college. Now, I was goofing around with the Affordability and Transparency Center earlier this week, and sometimes when I go to a college's website and I'm looking in the financial aid section, sometimes it's difficult to find that net price calculator. But there's a net price calculator link right in that Affordability Transparency Center. So you can type in a college name and it takes you directly to that college's website. So that's just ease of access. And there's a lot of other resources in that Transparency Center that I talked about as well that are going to be really useful. And the net price calculator is really good too because, like John was saying earlier, you can start to get a sense of what this might mean for your family financially if you were to attend that college. And it's good to have those discussions up front instead of at the end portion of this process where, heart might be set on going to a particular college, but then you get the financial aid package and it's a hard conversation. So it's better to think about that and talk about it at the front as well. And so then we get to tier 3 research. And this is where students really get to interact with a quote-unquote college. That might mean going on a college visit. preparing for that college visit. It might mean registering for virtual tours, virtual panel discussions, which really took off during the pandemic, and I've seen a lot of students take advantage of those opportunities. And colleges are tracking to see who registers. So if I'm interested in, being a psychology major and this college A is doing a panel discussion on what it's like to be a psychology major, I register for it, boom, they've got my name in the database and they see that I'm interested in them, okay? Some colleges are gonna take notice of, how interested you are in them and how many contact points you may take advantage of throughout this process. And that virtual presentation or virtual tour might be one example of those. Another example John talked about earlier is when we have hundreds of admissions counselors come to the College Advisement Center. And that's a really great opportunity for students to sit down and start to develop a rapport with the college admissions counselors who are most likely going to be reading their applications. And it's a really simple process. Anne-Marie Galetto sets up all of those visits during the summer, and then she sets them up into our Naviance system. By the way, about 15 minutes ago, all of you should have received login credentials for the parent Naviance accounts, okay? So you should have an email about that right now. So I suggest you go and check that out on your own time, play around with Naviance. You're not going to goof it up and accidentally apply to college. It's just, I think, the best way to get to know it and to really get used to the resources and how to utilize them. It's just to gain some experience. Okay. So yeah, back to interacting with the colleges. So Anne-Marie will set up those visits, and then students can, when they add colleges to their Naviance accounts, they can click a register button and register to see that college in the College Advisement Center that day. So then Anne-Marie will write them a pass, they'll come get the pass, and then they'll sit down and hopefully demonstrate their knowledge of why they're excited to attend that college and have some research-based questions for their admissions counselors, and thus making a really good impression and developing that rapport. Because if you think about it, it's better that that admissions counselor knows a student. I think the more information that they have in case they need to go advocate for them in the admissions process. So we really want students to take advantage of that face time with admissions counselors. If they can't make it, we ask students to write an email just stating why they couldn't make it. Usually it's a conflict with a class or a test. Yes?
Do you prepare them for that face-to-face contact with the administration people they're going to meet of different colleges? Because it's important to put some impression.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there's a certain amount of preparation. During college planning seminars, we talk to the students about, hey, these are the things that you need to be doing. You need to research that college first. You have to develop some questions, and they always ask, well, what questions should I ask? Well, if you do that research, it might not be a question. It might just be something that you get excited about, that you want to comment on, and you can get more information on. If you say, I was trying to figure out what I was reading here on the website, can you give me some clarification on it? And that's a good way to start the conversation. Sometimes I'll have students individually come in and say, hey, can you help me prepare for this visit? So it's not like a formalized thing. We discuss it in our sessions and things, but periodically we'll have students come in and ask for specific advice individually. And those are great conversations because it helps me get to know that student's desires a little bit better as well so that I can advocate for them too. So.
Will there be sufficient time or list provided for the boys so they know who's coming?
Yes, so those in August, I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but we're going to do some seminars in end of August. And by that time, Anne-Marie usually has the visit schedule all set up. And when we're talking about this with the students right before they start their senior year, we'll show them, hey, here's your schedule list of colleges. And usually Anne-Marie will also put out college visits for the week. So every Monday, she'll put it on announcements, she'll throw it up in a Schoology message. So we really push that out there because it is really important.
Is there an interview anymore? Do they do face-to-face interviews to get into college?
Yeah, some do, not all of them.
Okay.
And I think, well, correct me if I'm wrong, Ms. Uren, but I think that number of interviews might be decreasing just because the number of applications has shot up.
Yeah, I was going to say, I went to college a long time ago, but you went for an interview. But now, they must get thousands. It's so online now, right?
Yeah, so Small colleges will come in, like LeMoyne will come in and set up interviews all day with students.
Oh, that's nice.
Fordham will do that sometimes. You know, a lot of your large colleges will have, you know, regional alumni that students will go interview with. And it's not necessarily evaluative, but it might be something where that alumni or alumnus or alumni will, you know, report back to the college, yeah, I do think that student would be a good fit. We had a good conversation. And then, you know, the admissions office will do what they will with that information. So it varies. Some colleges, during the application process or after you hit submit, will email a student with dates and times to register for an interview. So it's just a wide range of how these colleges are going to work. None of them, there's no standardized procedure. And that's what I think makes it a little bit harder for students to manage, is that not every single college, but a lot of colleges have just little idiosyncrasies with how they go through this process. So when I have a student who's applying to 20 colleges, you know, it can be really overwhelming for them to get a sense of what exactly do they need to do for that college. And it also makes it more difficult for them to really demonstrate their knowledge and interest to 20 colleges as opposed to like 6 to 8 colleges. So, good question, thank you. Okay, so that is the college reps for Tier 3. Another example of Tier 3 research we talked about already was the college fair that we're going to be taking students to on March 18th. I can't think of a better way to spend my birthday than to go on a field trip to the college fair. So I am looking forward to that day. It is just a high energy environment. It's a great environment. But it can also be overwhelming if you're not prepared. So we do have sessions with the students before we embark on this field trip. We'll give them handouts that list all the colleges that will be there. We'll have a map for them that they can use to kind of plan out that visit. Because when we get there, we'll have maybe an hour, maybe a little bit more, which is not a lot of time. Especially when there's hundreds of other students with whom they want to interact and hang out with at the same time as when they need to get business done by talking to these colleges. But again, it's a great opportunity. You've got all these colleges in one place. So it's like, it really makes sense to take advantage of that opportunity. Okay, I'm going to switch gears. The college search, again, if you take a look at those YouTube videos that are out there on Naviance and Being an Educated Consumer, you'll see some in-depth explanation of how to actually use these websites. Okay? I want to talk about being an informed and educated consumer. And I think this is important because as you do the research, or as the students do the research, they're going to come across these terms like yield rates, retention rates, mid-50% that we talked about before. But they have to know what those things mean in order to really wrap their head about it. But in the book there, under, I don't remember what page unfortunately, but it talks about being an educated consumer, and it says, has the term caveat emptor. So that means that the buyer alone is responsible for checking the quality and suitability of goods before a purchase is made. So let the buyer beware. So this is like essentially the concept that we're trying to push to the students is like, you have to become your own college search expert. Like, if you get a sense of like what you want, what's important to you, like the needs and wants that I talked about before, if you know what those things are, you are going to be better suited to get out there and match these colleges to what you want, all right? So to do that, like I said, you have to understand terms. And I'm just going to run through them. The first one is acceptance rates, okay? Most colleges want lower acceptance rates, mostly because they'll appear popular or like highly sought after. And sometimes low acceptance rates lead to a better ranking on the national reports. But selectivity does not necessarily equal quality of education. I think more than 70% of the colleges in this country accept more than 70% of their applicants. And alluding to what Mr. Young said before, a lot of us are focused on like the top 15% when there are so many other options out there, okay? So I really try to push this with the students. Just because a college has a 5% accept rate doesn't equal the quality of education. You have to figure out if that's going to be the right place for you, if they offer the right, sequence of courses and have the right opportunities for you, okay? Retention rates. So retention rates measures the percentage of first-time, full-time undergrads that return the following fall. So the National Center for Education Statistics said, and this was just under 5,000 colleges, the average retention rate for 2022 was 76.5%. Okay. I'm sorry, I skipped ahead there. Retention rate, yeah, no, I'm good. So yeah, 76.5%. My notes got a little screwy there. So I want to talk a little bit more about retention rates and use this excerpt that I found during my research that better explains it. So freshman retention rates can provide a window into a number of aspects of a university or college. A low retention rate can indicate a number of issues. Perhaps the recruitment and admissions process creates a poor match between student and college. It could mean an environment that is not supportive of student success. It could even mean that the institution is in financial stress and cutting instructors, classes, or other programs. But you have to look deeper at the statistic. Many schools have as their mission to reach out to non-traditional students or first-generation students. And given their life challenges, these students find it more difficult to pursue higher education in a traditional manner. So stopping and starting numerous times may lead to a degree, but creates a statistic that is not reflective of the institution's success of fulfilling its mission. So there's so many factors that come into play to those retention rates. Just by looking at it, if you see like a 50% acceptance rate and say, oh, no, I don't want that one. But you really like everything else about the college, I think it would make sense to look into what's contributing to that retention rate. Okay. Then we get to yield rates. Yield rates is the percentage of admitted students who enroll at that particular college. So I've got some good numbers here. The national average from 2022 was 30.2%. So just to give a little relativity here, Princeton's yield rate, so again, the students who enrolled out of the acceptance pool was 78.3%. That's high. Dayton was 14.5%. And middle of the road, still pre-selected or good yield rate is U of R at 20% yield rate. I think when I first started, maybe 20 years ago, 30% was what people shot for, depending on the institution. So things have changed significantly because the ease of access to the college application, as well as how easy it is to submit. If I'm one student, I can submit to multiple colleges. So the number of applications is really at a particular college really affects the yield rate. Okay, but just to better explain the yield rate, so yield is, while selected colleges broadcast their acceptance rate, yield rate is what they really focus on. Okay, that's because the yield drives selectivity. So think of it this way: if you have 1,000 slots to fill in your freshman class, and 25% of those who are admitted enroll, you need to then admit 4,000 students to fill 1,000 slots. If your yield is 50%, then you only have to admit 2,000. If it's 75%, then you only need to admit 1,333. So let's say in each of those scenarios, the college gets 8,000 applications. In the 25% yield scenario, the school needs to admit half the applicants. If the yield increases to 50%, their acceptance rate is 25, and admitting less than half of the applicants makes the school selective. So the school's 75% yield accepts just 16% of their applicants, which would put it among the most selective colleges. Okay? Sometimes you can look at yield and think, well, maybe this is a backed up college for a lot of students. They might be close to another regional league, or they're in the same kind of category as another college, or related based on programming. So you can kind of look at it from an individualized standpoint as well. Okay. All right, graduation rates. So specifically measures the percentage of first-time, full-time undergraduates who complete their program at the same institution within a specific amount of time, 4, 5, or 6 years. Okay. So if you have students that transfer out, that's going to affect that institution's graduation rate. Okay. So it doesn't necessarily mean that kids aren't graduating that time. It might mean that they're not all staying there for the entire 4 years or 5 years. It might also be influenced by colleges that have accelerated programs or dual degree programs, which requires them to stay for 5 or 6 years. But in doing so, they earn 2 degrees. So again, more factors are going to contribute to what these percentages are, so you have to look behind those numbers. Okay. I've already talked about the net price calculator. We also discussed the mid 50% for SAT scores. And I also just wanted to mention the iPad Navigator, which unfortunately I can't show you, but that stands for the Integrated Post-Secondary Education Data System. And you can also link into that affordability and transparency center that I was talking about before. Okay. All right, moving on from there. So amidst all this research that students are doing, thinking about themselves, reflecting on what they want out of the college experience, that stuff is really going to come into play as they consider like the different factors for making that decision. For not only where they want to apply, but obviously where they ultimately will enroll. And this is really good. This is one of, I think, the most fun parts for me anyway to talk about in our college planning seminar, because as I'm discussing these different factors that they need to consider, students are going through and clicking on, large school, small school, this state, that state, in Naviance or in College Board's Big Future, and then they're getting a list right in front of them. So I get to see like, oh wow, this college popped up. So it's kind of a cool, geeky thing for me that I enjoy, and I think the students enjoy it as well. But it's nice because it gives me a chance to give more in-depth kind of ideas for thinking about what these factors are. So for example, you think about type of school, 2-year versus 4 years. Most of us know what that means. But when I talk to students about it, my intended career path might only require me to get a 2-year associate's degree. We can also talk about a 2-year school that has a 2+2 program if the student wants to save money. We'll talk about the differences between public and private. Usually that's financially related. Okay. We talk about the difference between the religiously affiliated and public or non-religiously affiliated colleges and what that might mean. It's easy to talk about the differences between McQuaid and a public school. Selectivity. We take that, it obviously is related to acceptance rate, but in this sense, selectivity, I want students to think about how their academic profile matches up with the academic profile of a particular, or a general student on that campus, okay? So it's not like, oh, this is 25%, I'm not looking at that school, or this one only, admits 15%, I'm not gonna apply there. It's like, no, look at it. Look at the students that are on that campus. Look at the grade profile, and let's take a look at yours. It's not just your SAT scores and GPA, it's the courses that we take. It's going to be your extracurriculars, it's going to be your recs and your essays, and John's going to talk about that later. So there's so many other factors than just, oh, I think I can get into that one or not. So it's your profile as it stacks up against what the traditional student has at that particular campus. Location, this is always a fun one. Since I started 20-something years ago, this story always happens at every one of these nights, so I'm going to keep the tradition going that, usually, in September, October, students are looking at colleges in California, Florida and stuff, but then we get closer to Thanksgiving and Christmas, and that just shrinks right down to mostly New York, PA, and New Jersey. And I think students start to realize how important family is to them and how often they want to get home. And the location also introduces some hidden costs. How much is it going to cost for me to get across the country? How many personal items can I bring back and forth on the college trip? If I want to get home for my little sister's birthday this weekend, can I do that if it's important to me? So there's a lot of factors to consider in terms of the location. Size, in terms of a student body, the size is really important. You can't make a small college feel large. It's just, you can't. St. Bonaventure is not going to seem like Ohio State. It's just impossible. But these larger institutions have particular programs, and just by the nature of being in a major yourself, as you get into those upper level courses, you're going to kind of develop your own cohort within that college. But some of these larger colleges will also have themed dorms, whether it's themed on a major or something else. Like Notre Dame has themed dorms, so that's a big deal for them. Some colleges will have an academic advisor with office hours right in the dorm, or some other kind of advisor, just to help create and maintain connections, so that those colleges can keep those retention rates higher, okay? The mix of students is really important. Mix of students, background-wise, socioeconomic, demographically, all sorts of things. The mix of students, I think the best way to get a handle of that, of course you can go on a college website and see the breakdown of where these students are coming from and whatnot, but I think the best indicator of like whether or not you feel like you can connect with these other people is if you get on that campus and see the students. If you're taking a tour, break off from the tour, or after the tour, talk to a random student, get a sense of like, hey, what do you think about this college? What's the best thing? What's something that you would change about this place? Just to get a better sense of what the students are like. You know, you might get a really articulate answer, you might get a not so articulate answer. So you might want to increase your sample size just to get a sense of what those students are like as well, okay? The academics, I mean, that's why you're going to college. You know, so it makes sense that college has at least one major that you're interested in, hopefully more than one. I'm not asking a student to decide what they want to do by the time they graduate. As you know, college is for exploration. Many of us change our minds during college. Many of us change our minds once we start our careers. So I can't put that burden on a student to make up their mind, you know, when they're 16, 17, and 18 years old. But I think it makes sense to understand what, like we were talking about earlier with the research under the academics tabs, what are the majors, minors, combinations of majors and minors that are available to me? You know, if I really like this place and I decide I don't like this major, can I stay there because they have something else that I'm interested in? So again, just another plug for doing that academic research. We talked a lot about cost. You know, you're going to hear a lot about colleges and how much financial need, what percentage of need is covered for their students. You're going to hear a lot about merit scholarships, other kinds of scholarships that colleges offer. I wouldn't let cost, I mean, this is easy for me to say because I'm not in your guys' seats right now, but try not to let cost be the main driving force in the college process, okay? Obviously, you want to think about it. But you can apply to a college, get your financial aid package, and be totally surprised that, wow, this is much better than I thought. And as you heard before, nowadays we have a little bit more, I don't want to say leverage, but it just seems that colleges are more flexible with negotiating the cost of attendance with families these days as well. Okay? Extracurricular activities obviously really important. You know, what are students doing outside of the classroom? When I went to Brockport, it was awesome. All the students are around every weekend. I was never bored. I could go to the Union and watch a movie. We could go out to a house party, or we could just stay in and watch movies in our dorms. My nephew went there about 7 or 8 years ago and said it was completely different. Nobody was around on the weekend. There wasn't really much for him to do, or at least that he wanted to do with a different group of friends. So it is really important to look at, you know, all of the extracurricular activities that are available, and that can be found in Campus Life or Student Life portions of the college website. Students can kind of like grow what they're doing here in high school. Obviously, they can branch out and find something different, but that can be a really exciting thing for any student to look at. Like, what kind of opportunities can I do just for fun that I've always wanted to do? And they might have a formal club or group for that at a college, so you want to look into those. And finally, facilities. The facilities piece, you know, this is where I ask students to think a little bit more about kind of like their daily routine that many of us just take for granted. First of all, you want to make sure that, you know, the dorms, the labs, libraries, whatever, are up to par. You know, if you're walking through campus and it just doesn't look very good, that's going to make an impression, okay? But in terms of the students, like their kind of like their daily routine, you know, if I'm a student who likes to study at night, are there going to be facilities available for me to do that? When I went to college, the library was open until 2 a.m. You know, so it was very easy to go and work and find a quiet place because we all know the dorms are not the place to do work at night. You want to make sure that if you like to work out in the morning, the gym's available or fitness center is open. If you need to go type a paper or print something out and you don't have something in your dorm room, are there going to be facilities available for you to do that that fit with the way you like to do your work now? Okay? And to really get a detailed sense of that, again, you have to see that college firsthand. And again, reflect on your daily routine and think about, okay, I think I could see myself doing that here. I can get up at 5, and go to the gym, and then go to my 8 o'clock class, and then I can go to the library, study for 2 hours, and then I can go to my next class. Yeah, I'm just making this up, but again, it's like, as you know, the students aren't going to be in school for 6 hours, and then go into practice, and then come home, do all their homework one time, and go to bed and rinse and repeat. There's a lot more freedom for them to develop their own routines, so it's important, again, to reflect and get to know themselves so that they can match those environments to what they want. So with that, I'm going to hand it back over to John.
Yeah, as you mentioned, one of the questions we get all the time is how do we prepare students for those meetings with the college representatives that come through the door. One of the things I noticed this fall that I didn't think we needed to mention to students, but now it will be on our list to mention, I was amazed at the student who walked into the University of Alabama visit wearing his University of Tennessee t-shirt. So I don't know if you can reinforce the point there with us a little bit. I want to talk a little bit, we've talked about standardized testing, but I think one of the things for you all to know, for those of you who might have gone through this process and taken the SATs yourself back in the day with the number 2 pencils filling in the bubbles, that has all changed. Everything will be digital for the first time this year, and your sons got a taste of that this fall when they took the PSAT digitally, so it'll be a big change. Also, for the first time, they're going to have an opportunity to take the ACT digitally. SAT will be 100% digital. There will not be any paper option. The ACT has preserved the paper option, but also added a digital option for them. And if you look at your booklets on page 16, that'll be a key chart for you to keep, if that's something you want to post on the fridge. Here are the dates of the tests, and here are the deadlines to register for those tests. And so the first SAT that will be available in a new format will be in March. Registration for that will be in February. So keep that in mind if that's the first time. But you can see that there's SAT test dates in March, May, and June, and there are ACT test dates in April and again in June. Yes?
Do they take place here?
No, they do not take place here. They will be offered at places all around the area, so it's worth when you go in to register, you'll see the list of locations of where they are. Some of them will be closer to your home at your local high school, others, but we do not host SATs or ACTs here. We do the PSATs here, and then students get to go all over the place to do SATs and ACTs. I recommend that people give one shot of each. Some people will perform better on one than the other. To give a shot at each one, I think makes sense. And maybe one will resonate with them a little bit more than the other. The Common Application. It is a form that has now sort of become ubiquitous with the college admissions process. There are now over 1,000 colleges that subscribe to the Common Application, one form that your son can fill out. You are limited that you can only apply to 20 colleges through the Common Application. You look at me and say, who would apply to 20 colleges? I can tell you right now, we've had issues with students who hit that 20 college limit and wanted to go beyond that. I don't suggest this for anyone. We see on average 7, and I think that makes sense because that can give you a range of choices both academically in terms of their selectivity, but also financially to make sure that you have some options. So if you think about applying to 7, and you're going to apply to 2 reach schools where your odds may not be as great, 3 schools where I'm right in the mix, it's not guaranteed, but I'm right in the mix, and 2 schools where it's really likely that you're going to be admitted. Now you've got a nice range, you're going to have at least 2 choices, maybe 5, maybe 7. Last year, nationally, students were admitted to about 70% of the schools to which they applied. So when you just do math that way, I think you're in good shape.
So where are the other, so only 1,000 schools subscribe to the
Common Application.
So where about the other 3,000?
So the other 3,000 will have their own application forms.
Oh, okay.
A lot of states will use their own state form. There's also another application out there called the Coalition application that some colleges use in addition to the Common Application. Most of our students, the Common Application does the trick for them, especially in the Northeast. It's the most popular form to use. If you want to go into your booklets, page 39 gives you an example of what the Common Application actually looks like once it's filled out. The thing that's a challenge is this is all filled out online. There are no paper copies of this anymore. It's all done on a computer. I'm in encouraging all of our students, once they finish the Common Application, to hit that handy print preview button so that they can see how it actually looks and find all those typos that they made when they look and see. It's amazing how they've gotten used to forms because you fill it out like you would go on to Amazon and buy something. That they're so used to forms auto-correcting everything for them, and the Common Application does not do that. So it catches, when you do the print preview, you catch a lot of mistakes there. But it's important to know there are no paper copies. You can't go find a paper copy of the Common Application to play with. It's all digital, it's all online, and it will open up on August 1st for students to use. You can open an account now and start playing around with it, but in August then they'll actually be able to fill out the application and start that process. I do want to talk a little bit about college application forms and rounds. This is when you hear a lot about early decision, early action, regular decision, restricted choice, early action. What do all of those things mean? Let me talk about each one of them. Early decision is a binding agreement. Students apply early, they fill out a form that they sign, that you sign as their parent or guardian, and we sign as their college counselor, that says, if I'm admitted and the finances work out, I will be attending that institution. As a result, you get a decision earlier, and in most cases, your chances for admission are greater. There's the advantage of applying your early decision. So if your sons go through their college search process and they say, here are the 7 schools that I'm going to apply to, and if I were admitted to all 7, here's the one that I know I want to go to. There's no ifs, ands, or buts, no gray area about it, and it won't change at all over time. That's when you think about applying early decision. And most people still don't go through the process that way, even though it seems like it. If you were to pay attention to popular press, you would think that the world applies through the early decision process and everything's wrapped up and done. We have some students who do that every year, no doubt about it. The vast majority of our students apply through early action or through regular decision, so that's still more popular options.
In regard to if the finances works out,
Yes.
how is that defined? Like,
That's a good
Right.
question. How is that defined if the finances work out?
right.
It's loosely defined. There are no early decision police that can come and take your son and force them to go to an institution that they can't afford to attend. On the other hand, I think it is incumbent upon families before they commit to a place early decision to have done that basic level of homework, done a net price calculator, gotten an estimate of what their financial aid would be like so that they go into that process with their eyes open as best they possibly can. There's nothing worse, from my perspective, than when a son applies early decision to an institution, they get admitted, and the family has to say, sorry, you can't go because we can't afford it. Who wants that to happen? That's not anything anybody wants. Whereas you go through and do a net price calculator estimate, then you can understand, hey, if we apply early decision, here's likely what our aid package would be, and we can handle that as a family, then it makes sense to proceed. A lot of schools will do a very specific early estimate for you if you ask as well, so they can do that on an individual basis. The next plan is early action. That's where you apply early, you get a decision early, but you don't have to go. That's wonderful. Well, why would somebody choose early decision over early action if you can do both? The acceptance rates are higher on early decision candidates than early action candidates. There's the advantage, right? And as a college, that makes perfect sense. If you admit someone early decision, you know they're coming. There's no mystery. You don't have to figure this out. My hardest job when I was the dean of admission was trying to figure out how many students we needed to admit to enroll the class size that we wanted. At Hobart and William Smith, where I worked last, we wanted 500 students. Not 501, not 499, 500. Well, early decision made that life really easy. I admitted one, I got one. We'd enroll them, you didn't have to worry about it. Early action, you admit one, I may get them, I may not, we don't know, and I'm not going to know until May. So there's advantages to both programs, but they behave very differently. There's also a program called Restrictive Choice Early Action. Notre Dame, Georgetown have those programs. You can apply early action to those institutions, but you cannot apply early decision to another school. They want to make sure that you preserve the option to go and attend, and they'll let you know. There are very few, I think there are 17 schools that have restrictive choice early action. Regular decision is still the most popular plan, where students apply by a deadline, they find out either through a rolling or through a precipice admission where everything's sent out on the same day. Regardless, you have until May 1st to make up your mind where you're going, and that gives you plenty of time to analyze finances and look at other things.
So the only difference between the early action and the regular is like you have to decide earlier?
No, you have to apply earlier. You don't have to decide earlier.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
So, for example, Some schools will have an early action deadline of November 15th. They'll give you an answer by January 1st, but their regular decision deadline isn't until February 1st, and they'll give you an answer by March 1st. So they behave the same way, it's just timing is different. So we see a lot of students now are applying early action to some schools and applying regular decision to others, just so they've got some options and they can see where things. It's nice to get those early action acceptances before the holidays, so I know I'm going to college somewhere, and then I can see where the others come through. Some schools don't have early action as an option. They only have early decision or regular decision, so it's worth paying attention to what each school, what school's options are. I do want to talk a little bit about the essay. It's the thing that I think students worry about the most when they get to their senior year, because it's the one thing they've got complete control over at that point. And I think it's been growing in importance post-COVID. It's really a personal statement, and students aren't, well, at least my experience says that most students aren't very comfortable writing about themselves, and that's exactly what colleges are asking them to do at this moment in time. They're really comfortable writing an analytical essay about the House of Seven Gables, or the causes of World War I, or a chemistry report. They do that all the time. But when to ask for your original thoughts on something, or your feelings about something, or an experience in your life that has significant meaning, students aren't very comfortable with that. So we'll spend some time in our college planning seminars, and certainly over in our summer seminars, talking about the college essay. There's also a large wave now in schools that have supplemental essays. In addition to the standard essay that they want you to complete, schools will ask the why do you want to go to us essay, or ask for their thoughts on a specific part of their mission or something that's important to them. Students should pay attention to those. Just because they're shorter in answer doesn't mean they're not as important. I think colleges have been paying a lot of attention to them lately. If you get excited about this stuff the way I do, I think there's a great resource for you out there. There's a website literally called the College Essay Guy. His name is Ethan Sawyer, and he puts out great material if you ever want to go look. He's got great advice, directions, snippets, videos. If you really are excited about the college essay the way I am, it's a great resource for you to have. I want to spend just a little time talking about how admissions decisions are made. We've been talking about all these elements of the application, all these parts, but I want to talk to you a little bit about how they all come together. Before I do that, though, I'd love just to do a straw poll of the group and get a sense of what people think is most important. I'm going to read to you the 5 elements that are part of almost every admissions application in the order that most schools read them, in the way that they review them in a file. And I want you to then vote on which one you think is the most important piece. And I'd love to see how everybody does on this one. All right, so I'll read them to you first, and then we'll have a vote. So the first thing that most schools are going to see is your list of co-curricular activities, your extracurriculars. Then they're going to look at your essay. Then they're going to look at your transcript. Then your recommendations, and then your standardized test scores, SATs or ACTs. So those are the 5 things that they're going to see on most students. Got it? All right, so let me read them again, and please raise your hand when you think this is the most important thing. How many people think that extracurriculars are the most important element of the application? I think we're going to vote for that. There's usually the parent of a really involved student who will raise their hand. Put it back. No one has voted for that. What about the essay? Anybody going to vote on the essay? Usually people who are good writers or English teachers in the room. What about the transcript, high school transcript? Got a lot of votes for that. Recommendations. Teacher recommendations, council recommendations. Mr. Griffin, I like when people vote for that, because that's what we spend our time doing. And what about SATs, standardized tests, ACTs? No one's going to be cynical enough to raise their hand for that. All right, this is the case where majority rules. The transcript is the single most important document that you're going to see for any student. The first job of any admissions officer is to determine whether or not the student can do the work at the institution. And the transcript gives them the best sense of that, because think about it, it's 4 years worth of work. Good days, bad days, subjects that are their favorites, subjects that aren't their favorites. You can see trends and patterns, and college admissions officers will look at that. Not only are they going to look at the GPA and what that number is, but what did it look like in 9th grade? What about 10th grade? What about 11th grade? What about 12th grade? Is there a trend there? Is it peaks and valleys? Is it moving upward in a direction? Is it moving downward in a direction? Is it consistent, but it's different from subject to subject? The student's got a 90 average, but they're a 94 in English, and they're an 86 in science. You need to pair through all of that to really understand the student and know what's going on there. So not only are they going to look at their performance, but they're going to look at the rigor of their curriculum. As we talked about with course selection, did a student go out and challenge themselves? And the hardest thing that I mentioned is we get the question all the time, is it better to get a high 80 in an AP course or a mid 90 in a standard course? There's no right answer to that question. I would love it if there were. But for certain schools, if you don't take the toughest classes, it doesn't matter anyway, right? You need to go challenge yourself. But for the mass majority of students, it's about finding that right balance between rigor and performance. Where can I achieve at a high level academically, but also challenge myself with the rigor of classes and not tip one so far over in the other direction? And that's where we need to have lots of conversations about getting that just right. After that, I think right behind the transcript, recommendations come in next. If you think about the transcript as being a fairly objective piece of information, then you get some very subjective information from the recommendations, and you bring those two things together, you start to get a pretty good picture of what the student is like. Add to that what a student does outside of the classroom. Now you're going to see what that person's going to be like in your community, and most college admissions officers are trying to build a community, not just fill seats, but build a community of people who are, somebody's got to be the goalie for the soccer team, somebody's got to be a staff writer for the newspaper, somebody's got to be a resident advisor in a residence hall. Who's going to do all those things? Students who have done things in high school and been engaged. So for your sons, I think it's really important for them to think about their activities now and how can they stick with what they've been doing and show leadership when it's possible. In other words, rather than a really long list of activities that people haven't done much of, it's better to have a shorter list where they can write more across the page. So stick with what they've got and do it to the best of their ability. Then, as I mentioned, I think you're going to jump in with the essay, that nice little story that a student can tell us about themselves, get to know them better. Standardized test scores come in there as well. I think what's a surprise for many, as we talked about, is the interview. It's becoming a more and more rare part of the process, but for schools who ask for them, they are going to be important, and they will tell you so. If they highly recommend interviews, it means your son should have an interview. If they're purely optional and they don't mean much, they're going to tell you as much. If they're purely informational and not evaluative, they will let you know that, and then you can choose to take advantage of them, whether you want to or not. But as Mr. Griffin mentioned, I think demonstrated interest is becoming a more and more important part of the process, very different than when I went through the process. Nobody really thought much about how much interest you showed in the institution. Now colleges can track every email that a student has received, when they opened it, did they click through to the web page, how long did they spend on the web page, did they come see us when we visited McQuaid, were they not able to come see us because they had a test but they sent us a note instead. That interest is becoming more and more important because, as Mr. Griffin mentioned, colleges are trying to manage yield, and the best way to manage yield is to know how interested the student is, and then they know that they're more likely to enroll them. I think what's missing from all of these kind of elements, though, is this sort of, what is a student going to bring to the table? What are their points of differentiation? How can they be special? And it's through these elements that they have to show those things. So think about that. It's not about how do I need to move to Montana and pick up the oboe to be really special. It's because I've performed well, I've contributed to my school and community, and people have some nice things to say about me. That's points of distinction. Those are differentiators, and stick with that. If you're really concerned about geographic diversity, just apply to schools that are far away. Because as much as we all worry that we're from the Northeast and we're not going to distinguish ourselves geographically, you are distinguishing yourself in the University of Arizona that way. So if you really want to take advantage of that, there are ways to do that. All right, lastly, I wanted to speak about financial aid. And as Mr. Griffin mentioned, I hope that you will all look more broadly than sticker price. I've got 2 in college right now. We planned that really well to do that. I've got 1 at a public institution in New York that our tax dollars go to support. I've got 1 at a private institution out of state. We are paying less to send the student to the private institution out of state than we are paying to send them to the public student in public college in New York. Sometimes they just have more financial aid to give. So please don't let the sticker price, and trust me, the sticker prices are wildly different. But it's costing us less to send our daughter to a private school out of state than it's costing us to send our son to a public school in state. That could just be our financial circumstances. But if you were to look at the sticker prices, you would think that one's going to be a whole lot cheaper than the other. and in the end, it didn't turn out that way. There is a new form that people are using. The free application for federal student aid has been in existence for years, but it's been completely revamped this year. For those of you who have older sons and daughters who have gone through this process and you filled out the FAFSA, it's a new form this year. It just opened on December 31st. It's now 36 questions long. It's a much shorter form. It links directly to your tax forms. You have to link them to your tax forms. In the past, that was an option, but now you have to if you're going to be eligible for aid. So it's simplified the aid application process dramatically. You used to get something called the expected family contribution, the EFC, was the magic number, right? This is what that form told you that you could expect to pay for your son or daughter's education. That number has changed now. It's called the Student Aid Index. Same concept, just a different phrase, SAI instead of EFC. And basically, when you fill out that form, you get a report back that says, here's what the aid index says. According to this form that I filled out, the federal government thinks that I can spend this amount of money on my son's education. Colleges take that information and build financial aid packages around it. They don't have to meet that difference, but they're going to try their best to do it. So that number is really what you want to pay attention to when you fill out the free application for federal student aid. Some private colleges use a different form called the CSS profile form. It asks many, many more questions. Talks much more about assets versus just income, where the FAFSA is really an income-driven form. The CSS profile is both an income and assets-driven form. It asks for a lot more information there, but again, same concept of what they're doing. But please, as Mr. Griffith said, and at least my story might be a good example, don't let sticker price dictate the pace of how you move through this process. You've got to pay attention to it in the end. There's no question about it. What it's going to cost you in the end is something you should pay close attention to. But at least initially, I think it's well worth having a broad search and looking at a range of schools financially. Let me turn things back over to Mr. Griffith to talk about a couple things, and then I'll come back up and close things out.
Thanks again, John. So this is like the part in church where, they just do the announcements before we get done. I just wanted to bring up a couple points of things upcoming, things that you need to know. So I alluded to the summer seminars earlier. Towards the end of August, we're going to have some mandatory sessions for students to come in for about an hour and a half to start their Common Application accounts and then connect the Common Application account to their Naviance account. In addition to doing that logistical item, I'll also kind of run them through the Common Application to give them tips, advice as they begin working on that process on their own. In addition to that, John did a seminar on kind of leveling up your activities list as part of the Common Application. And I think you did one on the essay as well. Yeah. So we'll definitely do those programs. There might even be another one that we decide is important for the summer, but we'll notify you during the summer with our messages out to you so you can't miss it. And I know I say mandatory, but some students just can't make it, and that happens every year. So when the school year starts, I'll do a makeup session, perhaps two, depending on that number. So we'd like to have the students all do this in the summer because the only thing they've really got going on is, just getting ready for the school year, practice, work, or whatever, instead of having all their schoolwork to work on at the same time. So really, it's a nice jump start for those students. On page 32 in the booklet, you have brag sheets. There's a parent brag sheet and there's a student brag sheet. We're going to send those out to you again in the summertime. Those are really important for us as we write our recommendation letters. So we're going to start introducing ourselves to your students this February. So like last year, I met with students in February, I met with them again in March, and then again between April and May, and in addition to that, did some college planning seminars. So those are like the formal meetings I have with students. But then there's some informal meetings that will happen just organically. Students have questions, want to schedule their own appointments, etc. But that's still a limited amount of time for me to get to know the students. So we would ask you that you fill out these brag sheets, and they're wonderful as we sit down to write the recommendation letters, because it gives us some really good anecdotal information to illustrate or show the colleges instead of tell them that a student has a good work ethic. If I get some really nice anecdotal information, I can describe what that work ethic looks like. And that's really important for colleges to see. That's a meaningful letter. So please help us out and do those brag sheets. The NCAA Eligibility Center is available and necessary for students who are interested in Division I or Division II sports. Students who are going to be pursuing Division III do not have to register with the NCAA Eligibility Center. But typically students will do this at the end of their junior year, probably around July. We'll have that around July, after the end of junior year, we'll have what's called a 6-semester transcript. So that is, freshman, sophomore, junior year grades, 2 semesters each year. And so when that's done, we'll be able to upload that into the NCAA Eligibility Center just so that we can, they can start the verification process. We talked a little bit about gap years. And what we didn't talk about was deferred admission. That happens from time to time. We saw it more frequently during the pandemic. And that happens when a student gets accepted at a college and for whatever reason is unable to attend that following fall. So if that happens for a student, it could be a family issue, it could be that I'm just not ready, maybe there's a medical issue. Sometimes that college will hold a spot for that student to start a year later or a semester later, and hopefully they'll also hold their financial aid package as well. But each college is going to have a different process for how they work with a family and a student on that. But those are possibilities as well. In addition to that, you've got in that book on page 27 a list of helpful websites. And I did mention some others that I don't think are on that list, so that is not an exhaustive list. Okay? There are tons of resources out there that you can utilize throughout this process. Some are better than others, some are dubious, and we share those words of wisdom or cautionary words with the students as well, especially with regard to essay advice. Some people that just decide to do their own YouTube channels or talk, self-proclaimed college essay expert or college admissions expert, you might not necessarily know. So if you are interested in discussing any kind of website, hey, do you think this is a good one? Have you heard about this? Just feel free to reach out to us. Okay, we might be able to add it to that list if we don't know about it. So that's all I got for you.
Let me close things out with a little story and words of wisdom. You would think, given what I've done for a living for the past part of 30 years, that my kids would pay a lot of attention to what I had to say about this process. But the older they got, the less I know. And to me, one of the things that was really helpful was for us to set up a time that we were going to talk about college, because you'll find this starts to dominate the landscape for a lot of your students. Come senior year, their first question is, where are you going to college? What are you going to major in? It's constant. And some students love that, some students don't like that so much. As a matter of fact, I was having a conversation not that long ago with a mother and a son, and they clearly were not on the same page when it came to this process. And I asked, well, how often are you talking about this? And at the same time, the son said, all the time, when the mom said, not at all. Clearly there's a misperception about what's going on. And I think coming up with a healthy plan, at least in my house, that was Sunday night at dinner. We're going to talk about this Sunday night at dinner, and if I've got a question on Tuesday, I'm going to write it down and I'll hold off until Sunday night. And to me, that keeps things in check. But as parents, you know your kids, you know them well. You need to know what's going to serve them best when it comes to moving this process along, but also protecting their self-esteem. This is a hard process. Most students, as I mentioned, are going to get some really good news in all of this. As I mentioned, 70% of students are admitted to the colleges that they apply to. But that means they're not getting admitted to 30% of the schools that they apply to. And for some of your students, this is the first time they're going to get that kind of bad news. And as parents, I think your job is to really help protect their self-esteem and make them feel really good. If there's one piece of advice I have for you, when all of it is said and done, and once they choose a college, which is coming up for our seniors within the next couple of weeks, tell them you love them, tell them you're proud of them, and tell them you couldn't be happier with the choice. And then they're set up to be immensely successful when it comes to the next 4 years of college. So thank you for spending time with us this evening. Good luck with all of this. And you've got all of our contact information in that booklet. Please don't hesitate to use it. We're happy to answer questions at any point along the way. Thank you.
Thank you.